And
what happened, Jared?
it was so tough. I was, out there skiing in Aspen this past weekend, and I think I tore my ACL. And I've been having this recently. I even started doing fencing. Have you done fencing?
What's
It's a great sport.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a great sport. I just recently got kicked off my family's, trust fund, and kind of on my own, living in New York, right, in the middle of, Manhattan, working on Wall Street as an investment banker, actually surprisingly tough, right? I mean, when I got out, right, I graduated from college, I had, basically I was just barely making six figures, right?
Must be so rough.
Having a Princeton degree, you'd be making more, right? Did I mention that I come from Princeton?
Oh, no way. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a great place. It's hard to get in. I wrote this great essay about how I really care about, the poor and the people who are, really struggling in the world. And
you're such an inspiration.
Yeah, no, seriously, we believe in, in the service of all nations. That's what I'm going to do. Finish on Wall Street, do a couple years, and then I'm going to go out and I'm going to really serve the world, right? I'm going to maybe build my own nonprofit, do some of that kind of work for a couple years.
Thank you for your service. You're so brave.
I try to be.
Don't we just love Ivy Leaguers? They're such pleasant and likable people, and we just always want them around. Chances are, if someone in a 10-foot radius went to Princeton, you'll definitely know about it. Welcome back to another episode of Your Friendly Neighborhood College Counselor, where we simplify college admissions for you. For those of you who've watched our past videos about the types of US universities, you'll know that Princeton belongs to the elite, highly selective, northeastern universities where you'll truly find the cream of the academic crop, or legacy admits. Its acceptance rate, while often withheld, hovers around 4% and is particularly renowned for its engineering program. In this episode, we'll learn all about Princeton University so that you can decide whether it would be the perfect fit for you, with insider details from an alum himself about what the experience is really like, and some actionable insights that can help you in your application to help you get in. I'm beyond excited to introduce our special guest for the episode, Jared. Jared, how are you today? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself outside of your sports injuries?
Well, thank you, Chandra, for the wonderful welcome. Thank you for having me. To sum everything up, I went to Princeton, graduated in 2013, and very much was one of my major dreams. When I was a kid, I just wanted that experience of getting to go to the Ivy League to see what that was like. And I always resonated quite specifically with a place like Princeton once I started to get to know it a little bit better toward the second half of my high school years. And I was always kind of that somewhat intellectual, kind of preppy type of kid myself. And I just, completely resonated, right? Ended up studying English literature, even though technically I began with medicine and, changed significantly as a result. I used to be much more buttoned up and everything. And now, look very different. I wear my hair long and all these different kinds of things. So, yeah, I think that it's a place that's shaped me very deeply. I, work at a company now where I have two other Princeton graduates, right, who are, my colleagues. Others, in fact, who've also been colleagues in some form. So it shaped me deeply, and I owe so much to it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think that's a testament to the bonds that are forged on that campus, that even well beyond your graduation, you continue to stay in touch and even, work together and build projects together and spend your lives, intertwined. So, Princetonians have somewhat of a reputation for being very white and wealthy, generally conservative, highly connected, and of course, preppy. How true have you found this stereotype, and are there any myths that you'd like to debunk around this?
Basically, the myths are true. I will not sugarcoat that. There is a prevalent stereotype, and stereotypes tend to have a basis, right? They don't come from nowhere. So with a place like there, Princeton, I would say, is certainly preppy, pretentious, academic, intellectual, right? But also a place that cares deeply about service. And there's always that contrast happening, right? This is a lot of quite wealthy people, right, who are doing quite well in society. And, I would argue in some form kind of feel a little bit of a responsibility, right, out of guilt almost, to be doing something for the world. Hence, we have this kind of informal motto where we say, Princeton in the nation's service, in the service of all nations, right? And, Woodrow Wilson, former U.S. president, folks, he, aside from being a problematic individual, was someone who very much believed in that kind of an ideal, right? Served as president of Princeton for a good term. And the place used to have a lot of monuments and, well, if not monuments, at least buildings named after him and whatnot. Now that's changed. But his philosophy, I think, is such a core part of the institution.
Wow. That's so interesting. So there's almost like this paradox going on of like more seemingly stuffy, stiff upper lip sort of students who also are genuinely interested in giving back, or at least using so much of the privilege that they have to do good. And what you're sort of saying is that that stereotype can kind of ring true, but it's not entirely complete, right? That there is this other aspect to it. How would you describe the overall vibe of the university? If I were to walk around on campus in Princeton, New Jersey, taking in the sights and sounds, I really want to understand academically, socially, and even otherwise, what kind of feeling I would get while I'm there.
So I think the first thing that you'll notice, hands down, is that it's a beautiful place. It truly is. You can't get past that, right? Especially if you come in the spring, you'll see the cherry blossoms, right? They advertise it on all of their websites and their brochures and everything. And the lawns are perfectly manicured, right? It's just this green, idyllic space. And like they've done that. Exactly, right? And they've done that on purpose, right? They want it to be that way. In contrast to, say, like Harvard or Yale, which are urban campuses, right? Or even a UPenn, right? Princeton is very much, in a more suburban, almost kind of rural type of environment. And it's closed off. So it's, very much the ideal of that ivory tower kind of experience, right? You are away from pretty much everything, right? The little college town of Princeton is it, right? And we like to call it the old folks home as a result, right? Because it very much feels like you are at a retirement home and everything is just kind of made perfectly for you. Everything they serve to you, right? Your financial aid package, right? It'll cover so much so that, things like printing and washing your clothes, all this stuff is included, it's free. So you just have this pampered type of experience, essentially. I see. And in terms of, like strictly vibe, I would say people are just very intense, I would say, at Princeton, right? They are super smart, right? Super driven. They want to be the leaders of the world. They want to make a lot of money. They want to do something meaningful with whatever success that they have. And, they may be really, really focused on that 90% of the time. But then, say, Thursday night, right, and Saturday night, those are our party nights primarily, right? That's when, another person just kind of awakens for them, right? And now they're out having a great time, up, super, super late. There's this place called The Street where the eating clubs are, right? Which is our kind of main social space, right? And it's whole kind of social culture, I would say, is bound up in exactly that spot on campus. Oh, okay. Right? So there's always that push and pull, if you will.
Town and gown.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what I'm understanding is it's sort of like a world unto itself, in contrast to the other Ivy Leagues. And there's a tendency to kind of group all Ivy League universities together as sort of one type. And what we're learning through this series is that every university is so distinct and has such a different type of person who would thrive in that environment. And that's why we're trying to help students understand where they would fit in, even at that very elite selective level. Sure. And how would you say the fact that Princeton seems so, I would say, self-contained and in a different region, not an urban setting, with such an intimate campus environment, how would you say that influenced the sort of community feeling on campus?
There's a certain kind of homogeneity, I would say, to that, meaning, everyone is very similar. They're almost pretty much the same, you could say. among the Ivies, right, Princeton, I would argue, is the preppiest, right, is the most pretentious in that particular way, right? If we have to split hairs, because we very, very much are, right, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, very similar places, right? This is the one that feels the most abrasively classist in that way. You come to a campus like that, you meet people. I didn't come from that background, right? I was middle class, strictly middle class, in some ways, sometimes a little under, right? Because we had a lot of struggles in my family, right? However, when you come to Princeton, you find that there are folks who are fabulously wealthy, right? They have all these inner kind of connections going on. They know exactly which clubs to join before they come to campus, right? They've made all the right relationships, right? And they're joining these clubs, right? The eating clubs that I mentioned, right? Which are exclusive entities, half of them are, right? And to get into those clubs, often you have to be in the know, right? So there's this kind of environment that's going on, kind of a culture that's underneath the surface in so many ways. But it's not about necessarily being, say, white, for example. White people, black people, Latinos, whatever it is, right? These are the folks who fit a certain kind of culture, if you will. They've all still gone to the same kinds of schools, right? They've all maybe got similar income levels, right? And they speak the same language, you could say. So often you'll see, when you look at the numbers, all right, technically, maybe it says, X 7% black, or I don't know, 6% Latino or something, right? But really that number is not always reflecting, say, all right, the disparities within those groups, right? It's the privileged blacks maybe, or the privileged Latinos, or the privileged Asians, or whatever, right? They're the ones who are there, right? So they all understand it, you see?
Right, sort of the model minorities.
The model minority, absolutely. You look at history, I mean, geez, it's a place that historically was quite adamant about keeping out Jews.
Exclusive,
right? Keeping out blacks until a certain period of time, keeping out women even, right? They didn't have women until 1969, okay? One of the later Ivy League schools to do so, right? But it turns out that once they started including these people, right, and they're very inclusive now, so to speak, right, it just meant that, okay, if you belong to that kind of more affluent type of crowd, then you feel much more comfortable, right? And it works for you just fine, right? But then on the flip side, if you don't come from that background, then you may feel quite alienated, unfortunately. Right? They're working on it constantly. It's something that you really do want to change about the culture, but unfortunately it is very strong. There's a J. Crew right there across from campus, right? A fancy, preppy type of brand that can be rather expensive. There's a Brooks Brothers right there across.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Streets, okay, right? All the shops on the front row of campus, right? Nassau Street, we call it, right? Kind of expensive places, restaurants, et cetera, et cetera.
Understood. Right. So what I'm hearing from you is that for students who don't belong to a certain socioeconomic class, there may be a certain level of pressure to quickly assimilate to this culture, to speak this language, and to comport yourself with a certain aplomb that is, indicative of a Princeton student. So many times when we meet Princetonians out in the world, the reason they seem similar to us, or they have a certain preppiness, is because they either already had that, or were very quickly, you could say, almost went to finishing school at Princeton and had to kind of get up to that level to be included and to feel welcomed by their community. So that's really important to think about when you're applying to Princeton, and if you decide to go as well, to be aware that, okay, it's a fantastic and phenomenal academic institution, but there are social dynamics at play here and economic dynamics that you'll need to be prepared for, and hopefully you can kind of adjust very quickly into that environment to feel comfortable, to feel at home. So thank you so much for sharing. We can move on to, maybe on a lighter note. Can you share any aspects of Princeton's history, like its traditions or its origins, that might play into a student's experience there as well?
Sure. So, first of all, Princeton was not even Princeton originally. It was the College of New Jersey, right? And then that name came up later, right? It technically was also the nation's capital for a certain period during the Revolution, right? It has a lot of, I think, a sense of kind of pride about really very much being what it is, right? An institution that is one of the oldest of the colonial colleges, right? The schools that were founded before the revolution. Whereas maybe a place like a Harvard or a Yale, they've sent a lot of presidents, right? You know, people who are at the top position of power in the country. I think of Princeton more as the kind of academic and, you know, often business-oriented kind of place, right? In that you have the Meg Whitmans of the world and the Steve Forbes of the world, right? Who have, you know, obtained significant wealth and influence in the country without necessarily being, like I said, in the White House or something, right? Or we have even Sonia Sotomayor, right? Who's a Supreme Court justice from Princeton, right? I feel like when I look at a Princeton, I think a lot about how it's managed to be its own thing, right? It's resisted kind of, I think, the urge or the push for other universities have to truly be a full university. It's still small, right? The enrollment is relatively, you know, small compared to the rest of the schools in that category, right? It acts like a liberal arts college, arguably, right? It doesn't have a medical school, right? It doesn't have a law school. It doesn't have a business school, right? It is focused on undergraduates, right? 100%. Now, our, you know, kind of peers there, Harvard, right? They are notoriously not very interested in the undergraduates. They've got all these grad schools that, you know, they send a lot of money to and have a lot of research going on for, right? But at Princeton, I mean, grad students are like an afterthought, right? The grad programs, I mean, they're there. There's a graduate, you know, campus that's just to the side, right? We almost never visit. We don't have a reason to. It's kind of far off. You have to make an actual trip to get there, right? You know, you just almost forget, basically.
And what does that mean for the academic experience of the undergrads? Does that look like more specialized attention from professors? How does that ethos permeate even the curriculum structure?
So what ends up happening is you feel like it is very much all about you. One of our friends, in fact, here at Athena, right, talks about how, you know, the experience of being in that ivory tower environment during your undergrad experience, right, means that you just get this specialized attention, right? They invest heavily in the curriculum. It is a general type of, you know, education curriculum, not an open one like a Brown, right? So they do have courses that they're expecting you to take, right? At least areas that you need to take, you know, your classes from, right? And they actively make it feel like it is this interdisciplinary liberal arts type of experience, right? So we have seminars, right, which are classes that are held for 3 hours. Okay, you talking at a round table essentially with the professor and your peers, maybe about 15 of you max, right? You get to go in depth, right? It's meeting like once a week. Or you also get to have the precepts where we might have classes that are certainly larger, right? But then they'll get much smaller for the follow-up class, which is called the precept, right? Maybe some point later during the week. That's like an hour, and you spend that with a, you know, kind of a understudy type of professor or possibly even a TA, right? But you get to go deeper into the text. And if you're lucky, of course, you do get to actually have it with the actual, you know, professor of the class, right? And all that is meant to give you this sense of how to go deep into the text, right? How to get really, really intellectual and really go, you know, abstract if you need to, and really get theoretical, right? Get to the first principles of things, and instead of, you know, of course, this kind of surface level. Got it. So
interesting.
Traditions, you know, we have reunions, which is this, you know, ongoing thing every single year, right? It's happening, in fact, in a week, right? I'll be attending mine, right? And the idea is they bring back every single, you know, alum, right? From all the way back in the day, everyone who's still alive, essentially, right? And they come with their bright orange jackets and whatnot that were all different for each year, right? And they get to celebrate that, hey, you know, some folks are about to graduate, right? And they welcome you into the fold. It's like being a family, you see? Because again, the undergrad experience is what matters for them.
Wonderful. That's so interesting. And I think it, again, like speaks to the strong fabric of the community that, you know, really pervades all these different generations of Princetonians. And just going back to your point on the curriculum, right? What I find so interesting is that it seems like Princeton's curriculum, and it's, you know, sort of embedded into the academic approach of deep intellectualism and learning for learning's sake, not necessarily everything having to have a practical outcome, but instead allowing that space to mull over ideas and having this sort of a high-minded approach to studying, which I think is in contrast to other more pre-professional and very practical-oriented universities like University of Pennsylvania, for example. So if you're the type of student who loves to philosophize and loves to have these long discussions till late at night, this might be the place for you. And especially if you envision yourself, going deeper into academia, maybe later down the line. And that's why Princeton has the highest number of Nobel laureates than any other university. So as we draw to a close here for our final question, I know we have many students in the audience who would love to get into Princeton and really see themselves there and see that university as a great fit for them. What advice would you give to our students about how to optimize their likelihood of admission and really showcase how well they fit at this university and demonstrate that through their essays, through their applications as a whole?
Okay. 2 words. Be pretentious. It's just that simple. All right. What do I mean by that? I mean, look, it's a place that holds itself to very high standards, right? It has a very high-minded approach to the world. Takes itself very seriously, and in some form looks for its, alumni to basically do the same, right? So for preparation, right, I would say, you'd have to be the kind of person who reads, right, and doesn't just read, say, the fuzzies, the comics and stuff, right, but, the deep stuff, right? When I got to campus, they were talking about Jane Austen and Dostoevsky and whatnot, right? These were folks who were not even going to study English, right? You've got to be coming in with a sense that you've actually demonstrated a real concern for the world around you. It considers itself, a place that cares deeply about, civic duty. And in its supplements, right, it asks a question where it literally says just that, right? And then asks, how have you done this, right? And how's that, fit with your story in life? So the kinds of people who I think, I'd say get into Princeton are the kinds who have, maybe done projects that are in some form trying to, right some sort of social wrong, trying to empower others. Maybe even they've combined that with their more academic orientation through things like, of course, getting really deep into a subject, right? Maybe multiple subjects, right? I think that would resonate especially. When I look back to my own experience, I was a kid who I said was, pre-med, sure. But at the same time, I was into art. And I submitted an arts portfolio. And, I was so into history and anthropology, right? And a little bit of kind of sociology, if you will. And those were the actual areas of study I put down on my application. Biology, of course, was there, right, for my, pre-med stuff. But I thought, seriously, I would probably study that. And that was encouraged, you see?
Wow. I think it's interesting to think about how a college's essay prompts are often a reflection of this institution's priorities and their values, and really the mission that students there are on. So always be looking at your essay prompts and asking yourself, why might they ask this in the first place? And make sure you're tailoring your answer to showcase and demonstrate that, yes, this is a core value of mine as well. And that's why we align so well. This is so interesting. Tell me a little bit more about your eating clubs experience.
Well, actually, can we wrap this up? I got to hop on the PJ. So.
Oh, wait. Sorry, your PJ? What's that?
The private jet, right? It's not a really big one, right? Just a little something that my parents, picked up, right? But, I need to go. We're going to have, oysters and caviar, right? It's kind of about that time, so.
Wow, I really wouldn't want to keep you waiting from that. That would be awful. Well, maybe you can leave our students with a final tip or word of advice before we leave, as we always do on Your Friendly Neighborhood College Counselor.
A tip, journal. Keep a journal.
Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you from your flight, so we will see you next time. Signing off once again as your friendly neighborhood college counselor. Don't forget to like this episode, share it with your friends, and do be sure to leave in the comments down below which university alum we should interview next.